Testing, check, check. 1, 2, 3. Hello. I'm running a little bit late because I've been working and I'm going to have to get back to it in a little bit. So it'll be a short stream again. Hi, I'm Pastor Koko, or known as Pastor Koko. I'm one of the elder pastors at VRMMO Church, and I'm over the church in Final Fantasy XIV. And we're a fully digital church. We've been around since 2016, completely digital, no physical locations at all. And our pastors and our congregation are spread out around the globe. And so I'm one of the pastors, and I guest teach. Not only am I like one of the pastors I'm the pastor over Final Fantasy XIV, but I also guest teach at VR Church once a month. And for all of that, I study quite a bit because I want to make sure that I'm not misleading people or teaching something that's not correct. So I do a lot of study in preparation for that teaching. And all of our pastors do a lot of study prep, but I'm the visual sort, and so my method of doing things is different than the other ones. And one of the things that we're trying to do here at VRMMO Church is to try to get people to start reading and studying the Bible for themselves again, because that's one of the big problems that we have in the world. And I talked about it a couple of weeks ago, is that people, the American Bible Society does a study every year on like readership of the Bible, and there has been a dramatic drop in the past year of adults reading the Bible and being engaged in daily study and reading of the Bible. And we were trying before I even saw this report, that there is a major drop in people studying and reading the Bible for themselves. They are depending on us, the pastors, to inform them and go about their lives. And it is painful to see, because the less you know about the Bible that you're studying, you need to know what you believe. First of all, you need to know what you believe. And just relying on other people to tell you what you believe is not what we're called to do. We're called to know and study for ourselves and show ourselves approved, know what we believe, and be able to make an account and a testimony of that. That is what we are called to do. So, and it's also, you're just missing out on so much depth and amazing, awesome relationship with God if you don't study and get into His Word and learn about Him for yourself, because there's so much more and such richness that you don't get on your Sunday sermon or your Saturday sermon. In my case, because Final Fantasy's on Saturdays, you're missing out on so much relationship and so much depth with God if you just rely on the pastors to tell you what to think. And so I'm going to tell you, and last time I was doing it the whole time, was saying, don't just take my word for it. Read it for yourself, study it for yourself. And that's what I'm trying to teach here, is how to study this for yourself. And my method may not be the right method, but it is a method that is very useful and effective to me. And the way that I do it visually, because I think visually I make connections and so forth visually, is I've made so much more connections and made that I never would have made just by cursorily reading it or just listening to what other people connections have made. There's things that apply to me personally that I wouldn't have seen, things that speak to me personally that I wouldn't have heard if I had just continued to take other pastors' word for it and not look into it myself. So the wish is to teach other people how to do this too, and empower you to do this for yourselves so that you're not just taking your pastor's word for it. And I use multiple sources. This chapter that I'm on right now that I'm studying, which we're going to be doing Sunday, is Matthew 24. This is a very controversial, highly debated chapter. Not controversial as in what you see on the news, but there is much debate over what it's actually saying. And so I have extra sources this time because I'm wanting to look into different points of view. I like to look at different points of view and then see what do I think, what do I agree with. And I may not be right. And the good thing about these people that I'm looking into is that they're of that. So whenever we don't agree with someone, we don't want to just cancel them and say, I don't agree with you. I'm not going to listen to you about anything you say ever again. That's immature. We need to... we wouldn't have any friends or have anyone to talk to anymore if we did that to everyone that we ever disagreed with. We need to be humble. We need to approach the word humbly. And it's one of the things that Jesus actually calls for is humility. And acknowledge that we don't know everything. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about these scholars that I look into is that they also say that they don't know everything and that they think they know, and this is why they think they know, but they could be wrong, and they admit they could be wrong, and they share other people's points of view as well, and then they say, well, I don't agree with this, because they're not canceling them. They're not just completely blocking out those other points of view. They're sharing them, and then the idea is that you look at this and you study for yourself and make your decision for yourself. And so I'm using a lot of different references this time because it is a highly debated chapter. And you can go back and watch those recordings from the last few sessions on YouTube. And it's probably on demand still here on Twitch. But I've talked through all of chapter 24 up to, I believe we stopped at... I think we finished up 21, and now we're on 22, I believe. So that's where we're going to start with 22. And again, this is debated over what he's actually talking about, whether or not this already happened in the past with the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, or if it's talking about future events, if this cataclysmic event called the tribulation that's going to happen, that a lot of people believe is going to happen in the future. So that is the debate. And I've also got historian records here that are secular about around the time of that wrote about specifically about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So I'm reading those as well. And I have videos and study notes from Bible Project, which is a very good resource. I highly recommend it. And I also use NetBible and Bible Hub. Bible Hub has all of your original Hebrew, Greek lexicons and commentaries from many, many different theologians. So they're excellent sources, and Bible Project is, of course, Bible Project. They have a resource on apocalyptic literature, which is very useful for this chapter that we're looking at now, and chapter 25, which is a continuation. It's the same talk. It's the same conversation as 24 and 25. So I won't do a huge recap from last time because, again, I need to keep the time down. So we're just gonna pick up at 22. and I'll talk a little bit about this section, is around the abomination of desolation. Because then we're in the middle of a conversation here with Jesus and his closer followers, his like inner like circle of followers. They're having this conversation because he had talked about the temple being destroyed in the future, and not one stone would be left on top of another. And then they asked, when will this happen, and what will be the signs of you coming back? Because in the just right before that, he had said to let's see, where is it? In 23, in 23 verse 39, I tell you, you will not see me from now until you say, blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. And that basically means you're not going to see me again until you accept me as Messiah. And so that is the context here, is that that's not, it had just happened not too long before this conversation that they're having around all the things that they're talking about. See, that's when is this going to happen? The destruction of the temple. When, so then how do we know when you're going to come back? Because it says you're not coming back until then. So that's the context. And so right now he's talking about, and there's two camps here on what is going on. Was it AD 70 that he was talking about, or is this some future great tribulation that's going to happen? And that's the debate. And we are on verse 22. So I'll just read. Let's see. And if those days had not been cut short, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And so I go verse by verse and I study all the commentary on it. And I use Net Bible because they already have parallel Constable's notes, which I like to look at Constable. I don't agree with everything Constable says. That doesn't mean I'm right. It doesn't mean he's wrong. But I'm not canceling him because of the things that I don't agree about. I still like to hear his point of view on these things because he's a scholar who's been studying this longer than me. So I am going to look at what he has to say. And the same with Barnes. I don't agree with everything Barnes says, but I'm going to look at him and see what he says as well. So let's see. So wait, was it 21 or 22? 22, yeah. Okay, so 22 is, and if those days had not been cut short, no one would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. So looking at Barnes, let's look at what the elect means first of all. And the word there means like those who have accepted him as Messiah, those who have chosen to follow him, those who have accepted. Elect means to choose. And it's here, so that's a good thing to use Bible Hub for. For example, if we want to look up what the elect means, we can go to Matthew. If I can see, I need new glasses. I'm waiting for them to come in. 24. And we're looking at 21. 21, 22, 22. Okay, now, and in here, this is a parallel Bible, so we can look at multiple translations to see what they say. And it looks like they're all using this, well, not everyone, because I was going to say all of them seem to be using the word elect, but not all of them are using that word. So let's see. They use... See, this one says God's chosen ones, and that makes it seem like God has handpicked some people that he's not going to, these are handpicked people, and that is that is also a term of contention and debate amongst Christians and theologians. So a lot of these translations do use that word, elect, but not all of them do. Let's see, chosen ones, elect, chosen people. Yeah, so they're using chosen people and the God's own people. So let's look at the original word here. I have chosen out, elect, choice, select. Sometimes that's, I don't know what a subst is. See, these are essentially the people who have accepted him as Messiah. People who choose to follow the Lord. So that's that we don't have time to go into, but some people say he has pre-selected people, and there's these different views of that in Christianity, that these are pre-selected people, predestination, so those people have been selected. But I am of the camp that says these are the people who have chosen to follow him and have chosen to follow him as Messiah. That's what it means by elect, chosen. Because he wants all of us. He's not selective. He wants all of us to accept him as Messiah. It's our choice whether or not we do. And he gives us that choice. So what it's saying is if things hadn't been allowed to continue, there could have potentially been a complete genocide of people. And those who have accepted Messiah would have undoubtedly been caught up in this mess, whether it's in the history or if in the future. Those who have chosen to follow him would undoubtedly be caught up in it. And that's why it's saying that the days were cut short so that I wouldn't be wiping out my own people who follow me because of it. And he's not actually the one that's another area. There is a lot of debate that goes on here. So Barnes, which is this commentator here that I'm looking at on the left, and Tim Mackey from Bible Project have the view that Titus originally planned that this is what happened in the past with the siege on Jerusalem in AD 70 and the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So their argument is that Titus had originally planned to draw out the siege and let everyone starve. Everyone. But the Jews fought back. Good for them. They fought back. So Titus took the city by storm, and then that shortened the whole thing because they had originally planned to just let them all starve to death over time. And Titus is the historian that mentioned that. And then Constable is the one over here in that Bible. He is of that this is in the future, and that if it had continued, no one would live. No one would be left. So he's of the argument that would be in the future. He's of the camp that... So Constable's of the camp that this is all... He's talking about the future, the things that haven't happened yet. And then Barnes and Mackey, Tim Mackey, Bible Project, are both of the opinion that he's talking about things that already happened, because in their perspective, it was the future. And there are arguments that they have about, well, he said in Luke or Mark, I think it was Luke, this is going to happen within the generation. And so within 40 years. And it did. Within 40 years of that conversation. So there's a lot more arguments than that, that we have already talked about. A lot of them. But they just keep... So Barnes and Mackey keep citing references to history, like this happened, this happened, this happened. It happened. And then Constable's saying... He's not saying it didn't happen, but he's saying it's going to happen again, worse. So that's where the debate is. So 22. So that's debate. Now 23 through 24. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, don't believe him. For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders to deceive, if possible, even the elect. And so again, the elect, those who have chosen to follow Messiah, those who have accepted him as Messiah. And even those people could be deceived by, and that's why he's telling them in advance. And it says here somewhere, I told you this in advance. I think it was up here somewhere. He said, I'm telling you things in advance. Yeah, here it is. I've told you ahead of time. Next verse. He's warning them so that they are not deceived. So now, false messiahs mean people who are claiming to be Messiah are going to show up, and people claiming to be prophets that are sent from God will be showing up, but they're not. They're doing things in his name, and they're claiming to be him, but they're not him, and they're doing things for their own purposes. And that's what he's warning of. And we do see a lot of that even today, that has happened. But the important thing to know and to think about here is that, and I've mentioned it in previous streams, is that there was a specific, very specific time frame that Messiah was expected to come, and that was the time frame that they were in right at that point. Exactly. And so everyone was waiting and expecting the Messiah during that time, because that was exactly when he was prophesied to show up. And all the signs and all that, is tons of prophecies. That's the whole point of Matthew, is to prove to us he's Messiah. It's written to the Jews, prove he's a Messiah. There's multiple reasons that Matthew was written, but one of the main reasons was that it was to prove to them that he's Messiah, and to also throw their their man-made religion on its head and get back to what he was originally teaching, which is an awesome book. The more I study it, the more I think it's awesome. So I recommend you read it for yourself without your preconceived notions. Read it, study it, and see how awesome it really is, because he's throwing religion on its head. Established religion. So back to this. There are people claiming to be Messiah, claiming to be false prophets. The problem is that and what's so sad is that he was expected to show up at a specific time, and he did show up, but they rejected him. It's like, no, I don't want you as Messiah. I don't like you. You're hurting my feelings because you're telling me I'm wrong, so I don't like you. And they rejected him. So they kept looking for another Messiah. So Barnes and Mackey both are citing history. Josephus is a Jewish historian who was taken captive. So Jerusalem at this time, Israel was under the authority of Rome. They were being oppressed by Rome, or occupied by Rome. And Josephus was one of the Jews that Rome had taken captive, and so he worked for them. He did not accept Jesus as Messiah either. He was not in the camp that we're aware of. We don't know. But from what he's written, he doesn't seem to have accepted Christ as Messiah from his words that are in there. So they're citing him, this third-party historian, that there are records in his books. I have his book on my shelf in the back, and you can also get it. There is this awesome website called archive.org where you can go and digitally check out books. So you can search for the complete works of Josephus or Titus, because they're both in here. And then you can check out that book. You can borrow that book and read it for yourself. So you don't have to go spend all this money buying your book. You can just go to this internet archive and check out the book to read. And you can do 1 hour increments. So that is also an awesome source that I've used for this study to read Titus. I do have the book Josephus on my shelf, so I can just pick that one up. It's actually a pretty fascinating book. Titus, from what I'm reading, is also pretty interesting, but I find Josephus very interesting. So he's got recordings that false prophets did appear during the siege and not leading up to the siege of Jerusalem, that actually did happen, because there were false messiahs after Jesus' resurrection and ascension. A lot of false prophets and false messiahs continued to show up during that time, and they were taking advantage of that expectation that people had that he was going to be there in that time period. Some of those people that Josephus talked specifically about, some of those people lied intentionally to the people to keep them from fleeing. And there were others that lied to drag them out into the desert and deceive them, take advantage of them out in the desert. So then they were so convincing in their lies and their signs and their wonders that they performed that they did, that people started to question, so was Jesus really a Messiah? Because these people seem pretty legit too. So their faith and their belief in him did start to wane. And here it says that they would deceive even the elect. And so even some of the people who had decided to follow Jesus as Messiah were turning away from him because of these lies, because they didn't heed that warning. And so their faith was starting to wane, and their belief in Jesus as Messiah was starting to lessen. That actually happened. And it still happens today. So history absolutely repeats itself, so there could be something that happens in the future. But it definitely happened in the past. Pretty much point by point, from what I can tell. We don't have everything, and I'm still studying, but that doesn't mean it won't happen again. But we don't know. And I'm still studying, so I'm not going to definitively say one way or the other. And even if I did think I knew, I still wouldn't say definitively, because we don't know for sure. We don't know. We think we know, but we don't know. And so Constable says that they've always been around, but they will be especially prominent during the tribulation, this future thing. I tend to lean towards Barnes and Mackey on the thing that this was what happened in the past because of that time period, that specific prophesied time period, that this is when Messiah is going to show up, so that's why it's going to be more convincing. But again, since we forget history and we forget context and we don't study history and learn about the context of when the Bible was written, because it wasn't written to 21st century Americans or English speakers, it was written to ancient Jews. So we need to put on the ancient Jew hat to understand it. And to do that, we need to understand more about their culture and their beliefs and their mindsets to do it. And that's why I recommend this story about this resource from Bible Project about how to read and understand apocalyptic literature. It's not supposed to be taken literally. But all of these things did happen. What he's saying here did happen. But there are some things, there is a lot of metaphor, like the darkened moon, the darkened sun, the stars will fall from heaven. These are metaphor, and they're taken directly from Old Testament apocalyptic literature. And we'll get to that hopefully soon. I'm taking a lot of time talking about this, so let's keep going. So Tim Mackey specifically says that there were a lot of false messiahs and prophets, and there was a danger of even deceiving those that were his actual followers, and some did begin to lose their belief and faith that he was truly Messiah. And So he knew all of these things would come. And so even if they do come in the future, and he was talking about the future, then he knows is coming. But we tend to get afraid, and we tend to give in to our fears, which a lot of people will do when we start talking about this chapter. And what he's saying, he's given us two missions. Again, two things that we're supposed to do. Stand firm in his teachings, and that means to study for yourself. Not take everyone else's word for it. Study it for yourself. Know what you believe. Know what you believe. And that means study for yourself. And that's mission 1, stand firm in his teachings. Mission 2, spread the good news that he is Messiah and he's going to bring true shalom, true restoration, full restoration and peace. That is coming, and these signs are that is coming. These things happening are signs that is coming. So regardless of where you stand, you have two missions. Stand firm in his teachings. And know he's got the future in his hands, and he is bringing about true shalom. And spread that good news to other people that he is Messiah, and he is going to bring that true shalom, that true peace, that true complete restoration with nothing missing. So if you're in this place of fear, and then that means that you're in a place where you don't believe that he's in control. This is Tim Mackey saying this, and I agree with it. You have to know he's in control. And you have to know, and you have to share that hope. So that's part of that good news of Christ. Share that hope, that he knows what he's doing, and that he's in control. So those are your two missions. He is in control. He's not surprised by anything that's happening. Anything that has happened, anything that will happen, he's not surprised. He knows. So stand firm in his teachings. And what are his teachings? Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, and intelligence. Love others as yourself. Those are, according to him, the greatest command. All the other laws and prophets, all the other commands hang on those two. That's his teaching. And you can read the New Testament, you can read Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John to learn his teachings and what he says about that. Stand firm in that. But to understand those, you have to go back and look at the hyperlinks in the Old Testament, because it's all related. They're not separate. The Old Testament is not irrelevant at all. The Old Testament is constantly referred to in the New Testament, so that means it's not irrelevant. But we have to study it and understand what it really means before we can truly understand what he's trying to say to us and truly understand his teachings. So 25. Remember, I've told you ahead of time. So then if someone says to you, look, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. Or look, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe him. For just like the lightning, and this is where it's going to get confusing, again, just like the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so the coming of Son of Man will be. Where the corpse is, the vultures will gather. Here's where we start getting into weird words that make no sense these days. And starts seeming scary and so forth. So let's look at this. So 25, I'm warning you ahead of time, this is going to happen. And that is so that they will be aware and that they can be prepared. So they won't be deceived when all of these things start happening. He's warning us ahead of time. So God warned the nation of Israel. This is my own observation that I made because I'm looking at these hyperlinks. Is that he warned them all the way back in Deuteronomy 28 that this was what was going to happen if they rejected him, if they rejected his commands. He said in Deuteronomy 28, way back in the Old Testament, when Israel was first formed as a nation. If, however, you do not obey the Lord your God by carefully following all of his commandments, and what did we say? What's the greatest command? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind or intelligence. Love others as yourself. All the other laws, all the other commands, hang on these two. Carefully follow all of these. If you don't do this, if you don't obey the Lord your God, and you, by carefully following all his commandments and statutes I'm giving you today, all these curses will come upon you and overtake you. And what curses are those? Exactly what's happening. Exactly what Jesus is talking about here. Was mentioned in Deuteronomy. All the way back then, it was mentioned and it was warned. So they were warned multiple times. And in chapter 23, he talked about how God sent prophets multiple times to them to warn them of things that were going to happen because they weren't following his commands and they weren't obeying him, following those, and carefully following those commands. They killed those prophets, and they were about to do the exact same thing to the actual Messiah. So he's warned them many times. And another thought that I had was that we can get so easily distracted and led astray by what's going on around us that we can very quickly forget what we've learned before. And this is why history keeps repeating itself. We don't learn from history. And scholars agree that this is relevant for us today, regardless of whether or not what he's talking about here specifically has already happened or will happen in the future. Again, history repeats itself, so it very well, quite possibly will. It's still relevant to us today. To not be deceived. He's warning us not to be deceived. And regardless of whether or not you agree whether this has already happened or will happen. This destruction of Jerusalem specifically. So 26 through 27 is, if someone says to you, look, he's in the wilderness, or look, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe him. That's saying don't follow these false prophets. They're going to deceive you. They're not the Messiah. They're not his representatives. So how do we know who the Messiah and his prophets truly are? Again, we have to study for ourselves and know. It's the only way. We have to study for ourselves, because if we're just taking our pastor's word for it, and I'm one of your pastors, if you're just taking my word for it, if you're just taking other pastor's word for it and not studying for yourself, that is going to increase your risk of being deceived. So you have to study it. You have to know this for yourself so that you're not deceived. Don't just take our word for it. And I'm saying that even for me. Don't just take my word for it. Study it for yourself. And I have this note here on Biblish Christianity, because I talked about this a couple of weeks ago about the readership, and I think I mentioned it just earlier. I don't remember. But we had this drastic major drop in readership of the Bible based on a recent survey that was released this year. Nearly 26 million Americans have stopped or reduced Bible engagement in the past year. And you can visually see a major drop here. People aren't reading the Bible anymore. They're too busy. That's where risk of being deceived happens. And false teachings, which are rampant, and they're going to become even more rampant if you don't read and study for yourself and stop just taking other people's word for it. But you have to know the proper way. How do you study? And so that's one of the things the Bible Project has awesome resources on, is how to read the Bible. I'll give you those resources too, so you know how to study it. And they have excellent resources. They have an app that walks you through stuff, and they've got podcasts in that app that'll show you notes as you listen to the podcast. It's a great app. Highly recommend. So now back to this these false prophets that they're saying don't go into the wilderness, don't go into the secret room. So Barnes and Mackey both cite Josephus again of the false prophets. The timing was right again for his coming. There were a lot of false prophets that showed up after Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, ascension. So they were expecting him. And they were expecting him to suddenly appear in an unexpected location. They were expecting him to be unexpected. That he did come in an unexpected location, which was Bethlehem. And they killed him. They were looking for him in remote places like the desert or in secret chambers, and false prophets did take advantage of that. I said that before. So this term lightning, this is in verse 27. So this term lightning is a metaphor for sudden and swift. And Luke gives more context because he's telling the same story from his point of view. And he's also talking about this is a different context where Jesus is using the term lightning again. So he's used it before in different contexts. It's a metaphor for swift and sudden. And Jesus said to them, because they were talking about power over the enemy. I think there was an exorcism that was happening or something. They were exorcising a demon, and he was talking to them about this. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Look, I have given you authority to tread on snakes and scorpions and on the full force of the enemy, and nothing will hurt you. And you'd have to go back and read that context. But he's given this before. He said lightning before. And he's referring to Isaiah, common ancient Jewish term that they would have used lightning. And it's referring to Satan's fall from heaven that Isaiah spoke about. Look how you have fallen from the sky, O shining one, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the ground, there, O conqueror of the nations. So your fall was swift and sudden. And that means don't try to predict when or where he's going to appear. It's like trying to predict when and where lightning will strike. It'll be rapid, it'll be unexpected, and yes, we have science that can try to predict it now, but it's still not accurate 100% of the time. And it will be rapid, it will be unexpected, so don't try to, this is talking about future now, is when he does come back. Or if this was referring to that past event, it'll be rapid, unexpected, so don't try to predict it. Zechariah 9:14 says, Then the Lord will appear over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning. The Lord God will sound the ram's horn and advance in the whirlwinds of the south. And so this term, coming Son of Man, here, will either be, and we don't know which he's referring to here, it'll either be in judgment or in person. So the destruction of Jerusalem is described as his coming in judgment. It has been described as that. Or will it be his physical coming back in person? So the events of AD 70 greatly resemble the final judgment that is being described here in all of his talk here, because Josephus and Tacitus both have records of these things happening. So now on Constable's side, let's see, let me make sure this is the right. Yeah, so on Constable's side of the camp, he's saying that many scholars, he believes that this hasn't happened yet, and many scholars believe this hasn't happened yet. And his argument is that lightning is very loud and noticeable. So Jesus' point, according to them, is that his coming will be very obvious. It won't be obscure, and everyone will know it when he does come. And his followers shouldn't fear missing the event because it's going to be obvious. They don't react to every rumor about his coming. And it would be very public, not something that only a few will witness. And Zechariah again says, he's referring to Zechariah as well, that same reference. And so they have two very different arguments. Sudden, rapid, unexpected, which is how the term has been used in the past in the Bible, or loud and noticeable. So those are your two camps. And since loud and noticeable hasn't happened yet, hence it will be in the future. Whereas Barnes and Mackey are arguing that that was his, it was in judgment over Israel, which happened. And then verse 28, where it says, wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. This is a common saying. It was a well-known saying at the time. In Luke 17:37, he uses this as well. Where the dead body is, there the vultures will gather. And in Job, it talks about the young ones devour the blood, where the dead carcasses are, there it is. That's talking about vultures, I believe. I need to go back and read it again. So there are multiple reviews, again, as to what this means. And overall, vultures in all of these different scholarly views indicate that where death has occurred, there is an indication of that by vultures gathering overhead. And so then Israel is the corpse, and the vultures are Israel's enemies. And a common belief, the translation of this is, where moral corruption exists, divine judgment falls. And wherever wicked people are, there will also be the instrument of their chastisement. They bring about their own downfall. It's within their midst. So Barnes is, again, this commentator from Bible Club. Vultures and eagles easily ascertain where dead bodies are. And he's saying that the Romans are the vultures, and the verse is connected to the one before on lightning, where it says, just like lightning comes from the east to the west, they're not a separate thought. They're the same thought. So the destruction will happen suddenly and certainly. And then Constable disagrees with that, about the assertion about the eagles, because the eagle's sign was the sign of the Romans. They used the eagle. So Constable disagrees with that about the eagles, because they usually don't go to carrion as their first choice, but vultures do. So regardless, vultures are the enemies of Israel, and Israel's the corpse, regardless of who that enemy is, some future enemy or a past enemy. And that's it for the abomination of desolation. So you have to look at it and you have to think of it for yourself. So is this talking about a past event or a future event? What it is talking about is whether or not it's past or future, is that he's warned us that this would happen, and he's warned us not to be deceived, and he has told us what our mission is. Our mission is to follow that mission. Our mission is not to be distracted and get wrapped up in trying to predict when he's coming back and spending all of our time obsessing over when he's coming back. Our mission is to share the love of Christ, stand firm in his teachings. Don't waver in his teachings. Stand firm in his teachings. Share his love. Share his good news. That's our mission. So, and I'm not done with the whole chapter yet, but I've started looking at the next section, which is the arrival of the Son of Man. And again, there's debate over whether he's talking about the second coming in the future or the destruction of Israel, so his coming in judgment on Israel that happened in AD 70, because that did happen. And the generation that saw him crucified was then, like they said, it had to be cut short or they would have all died. And so there's no debate over whether he will come again physically in the future. That's not the debate. And so now we're getting into the question of his arrival, really. There's no debate over that. The debate is over whether this judgment, this destruction, and these wonders and this abomination of desolation, whether that already happened or will happen. That's where the debate is. So 29, immediately after the suffering of those days, and it's important to pay attention immediately here. 29, let's see, 40, after the suffering, tribulation. So that's another, a lot of translations do say tribulation, is that that's that future tribulation that's going to happen. And that's the view that Constable has of it. But this says immediately, which means immediately. So go to Matthew 29. Immediately. That's what it means. Immediately after those events. So then again, the debate is, are we talking about the past or the future? The sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven and the powers of heaven will be shaken. So this is referencing an Old Testament scripture, and it is metaphor. It is apocalyptic literature. It is metaphor. So let's look at what it's quoting. It's quoting Isaiah. Indeed, the stars in the sky and their constellations no longer give out their light. The sun is darkened as soon as it rises, and the moon does not shine. And in Isaiah 34, all the stars in the sky will fade away. The sky will roll up like a scroll. All its stars will wither, like a leaf withers and falls from a vine, or a fig withers and falls from a tree. And then there's also a reference in Joel that the earth quakes before them, the sky reverberates, the sun and the moon grow dark, the stars refuse to shine. So these are common Old Testament terms that they would have known because they were soaked in scripture. They didn't just, a lot of people have this view that they just went to synagogue and listened to scriptures on Sunday and then went, or Sabbath, and went about their week and didn't think about it again. No, that's not the case. Actually, there was a lot of ritual in ancient Judaism. They were thinking and praying and listening and reciting his word every day, multiple times a day. They were soaked in it. So they would have known this reference. They would have known it. We don't, because we're not soaked in scripture, but they would have totally known it. So the net translator notes here, powers refers to heavenly host. Let's see. Yeah. Powers of the earth will be shaken. The heavens were seen as the abode of the heavenly forces. Powers refers to the heavenly host. So some take the powers as a reference to the bodies like the stars, but the translator notes say that's not likely. So some are taking it literally, but the translator believes that it's not likely. These were metaphors that were commonly used. The heavens were seen as the home of the heavenly forces, and the shaking indicates great distress in the spiritual realm. That's what it says right there. And then it's not to be taken literally as stars and planets, because again, they're saying this is not likely. So Barnes is of the opinion that these are metaphor. Wait, I need to fix that typo. And not to be taken literally. The terms are often used to denote great calamities. The sun and the moon often is also used to represent leaders of nations. That's my own remembrance of what scriptures happened based on what I've read. Like in when Joseph had that dream about the sun and the moon back in Genesis, sun and the moon were references to nations and leaders. So it's referencing the overturning of kingdoms and great catastrophe, and the destructions of other cities have been foretold in similar terms, like the destruction of Babylon was described in Isaiah 13, the destruction of Tyre, the destruction of Bozrah and Idumea, were also described in the same manner. And Luke gives more context. There will be signs in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth dismay among the nations, bewildered by the roaring of the sea and the surging of the waves. Men will faint from fear and anxiety over what's coming upon the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. So the roaring of the waves is another metaphor for great tumult and affliction amongst people. And so the fear was so great that it takes away their courage and their strength. So this is tumult amongst the people and amongst nations. So, and he does mention earlier wars, rumor of wars, overturning of nations, things like that. And that happened back then. And it still happens. So Tim Mackey says maybe these two poems that Jesus is quoting here don't mean what we think they mean, because they weren't written to 2020s modern Americans in English. They were written to ancient Jews, again, like I said before, and they were direct quotations from Old Testament. And the Isaiah 13 reference, which is what this first one is, darkened, the moon will not get all its light, the stars will fall. That one is a poem about the downfall of Babylon. And Babylon was one of the largest and most cruel empires known to the ancient world. And the destruction of Babylon was carried out by the Medes, and the world as they knew it came to an end. Babylon was reduced to rubble in 2 weeks. And that is poetic metaphor. So it's poetic metaphor is what it is. Jesus is associating Israel with Babylon, and he's direct quoting Isaiah as the description of what's going to happen to Israel. Constable says he's got this whole other, again, he's talking about future. At the end of the tribulation, there will be signs in the sky. And he's saying, literally, there will be signs in the sky. So he's taking it literally, whereas a lot of scholars, and I agree, this is metaphor. And we need to look at it as metaphor. There's nothing to say that God can't do that literally. But we also need to acknowledge that there's metaphor here, and so we don't know. If we don't know, we need to acknowledge we don't know. And in verse 30, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn. They will see the Son of Man arriving in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He's quoting Daniel 7 this time. And Daniel 7:13 says, I was watching in the night visions, and with the clouds of the sky, one like a son of man was approaching. He went up to the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. Sounds like poetry, because it is. That doesn't mean it's not saying something. So it's saying something very profound. It's just describing Jesus' coming. It's describing Jesus returning in his full authority. That's the translator notes. So Barnes is arguing that the evidence that he's coming to destroy Jerusalem, that's the evidence. That this, the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven. And that all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man arriving in the clouds of heaven with power and great authority. So, the evidence of his glory, of his power, say of his power, I think that's, let me see, let me look at Barnes. So I think I didn't write that post it well enough. What verse is this? 30? Okay. My head's starting to hurt because my headphones. The evidence that he is coming to destroy the city of Jerusalem. Sign of the Son of Man. Okay, the sign. Okay. So the sign of his coming is the evidence that he's coming to destroy Jerusalem. But he also acknowledges that it could be a future thing, that he may be describing both at the same time, which is possible. 1 Thessalonians, it says, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will be the first to rise." That hasn't happened yet. There were some stories about dead people rising at the crucifixion that I'd have to go back and study. But this is a future thing because this was written after Christ's ascension. So this is a future thing. So that wasn't talking about the crucifixion. So that's a future thing. And Luke says, "At that time they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." And Matthew says, "You have said it yourself," in Matthew 26. Jesus answered, "But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Acts 1 says, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand here looking into the sky?" So this is the angels that appeared after Jesus ascended into heaven. And everyone was standing around staring at the sky. "This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way that you've seen him go into heaven." So this is saying it will happen in the future. He will come back. So that's not the dispute. So now it says all the people will mourn. This could be the mourning for the calamities that came on Judea in AD 70, because could be that all the nations of the earth were mourning their coming judgment, which is a future thing. Revelation 1 says, "Behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. And all the tribes of the earth will mourn because of him. So shall it be. Amen." So those who pierced him are realizing that they deserve punishment, basically, because they're the ones that were responsible for his crucifixion. So then my thoughts on this are that if AD 70, if it was what happened in AD 70, that it would make sense that those involved with the crucifixion would be there to see this destruction, see this thing happening, him coming in judgment. And that would help. It would help to know when Revelation was written. There's debate over when it was written. Was it written before the destruction of Jerusalem, or was it written after? There's debate. Because Revelation was talking about a future event. So if it was written after AD 70, it wouldn't have been talking about. So there's debate over when it was written. Because some people are saying it was written a few years before the destruction of Israel. But there's debate because there's no definitive proof of that. It would help to know that because there's disagreement on that. So I would need to study that more, and I would say to study it more. In Zechariah 12, it says, "Then I will pour out on the house of David and on the people of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and prayer, and they will look on me, the one they have pierced. They will mourn for him as one who mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son." So that doesn't necessarily sound like, because there are some people that are arguing, like Constable is arguing that this is the unsaved will mourn their coming judgment, is what he says. So that's a more of a condemning mourning. But this verse in Zechariah says, "I will pour out on the house of David and on the people of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and prayer, and they will mourn. They will look on me, the one they pierced, the one they crucified, and they will mourn for him. They will mourn for me like they would for an only child, and they will grieve bitterly for me as one grieves for a firstborn son." And that made me think of a verse in Matthew 5, verse 4, where Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn." And so I made these notes from Matthew 5. Blessed are those who mourn. And this is a side thought. It might not be relevant, but it won't leave my head, so I'm keeping it in here as a note, that blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And that's a different root word that's used for mourn here than is used in this Matthew 24 reference. This mourn is the resulting state of being poor in spirit, which is, and you have to go back and talk about the Beatitudes again. That's because of a realization of our own sin, because we know how bad we've messed things up. And it's a true state of repentance and regret that we have done these things. And he's promising comfort when he returns to bring about his kingdom and that true restoration, true shalom. So he's saying those people are going to be comforted when they mourn. And then Matthew 24's mourn is striking your breast in grief. So that's what he's saying in Zechariah. This mourning is they're going to grieve bitterly like they would grieve for their firstborn son if they lost their firstborn son. And that would make sense if they realized and they looked on him and realized that he's Messiah and that they're the ones that killed him. That would be great mourning. It's like, what have we done? That's not talking about mourning because the unsaved being judged. It's talking about a regret and grief over, what have I done? It's like acknowledging you've done this thing. And that's a different thing. Let's see. So I'm thinking, because of this, that there may be two types of mourning that are going to happen. So those who mourn are like referring to two types of mourning. Those who mourn and repent will be comforted, because he promises that. And those who reject will mourn the judgment they will finally be, and they will finally be separated. So there's two types of mourning, in my opinion. This is my thought. That's why I have it in purple. Is that that's what's going to happen. Is that those who mourn and repent and accept him as Messiah will be comforted. And those who still reject him will mourn their judgment. And they will finally be separated from him because that's what they've chosen. They don't want to be around him. Okay. So again, Constable is saying that the clouds symbolize the heavenly origin and the character of the king. And there's nothing to disagree with there. And unsaved will mourn their coming judgment, which is possible. But this term unsaved, I could go into that too, but we don't have time. Those who reject him, those who reject Messiah. So Tim Mackey also says that Matthew is still saying, go back and read Daniel 7. Because it's talking about tribes of the earth, son of man, powers of heaven. He's saying, let's see, back in Daniel 7, it talks about beasts and these different symbols of kingdoms. And that he was, in Daniel, they were predicting this coming big super kingdom. And that it was an archetype of all the bad kingdoms of the world. And then God comes and sets up his throne and judges that super kingdom. And the Son of Man is the symbol for God's people and their King, Jesus. And then the riding on the clouds from death and destruction into heaven to take up heaven. Jesus was trampled and destroyed unto death, and he resurrected within 3 days. And before his ascension, he would send out his followers to all the nations together and spread the good news. And many think he's talking about the future destruction along with his return to earth. But in the end, it doesn't matter. Regardless, again, we have our mission. Stand firm in Jesus and share his love with others. And trust that history and the future are in his hands. Evil doesn't get the final say. Jesus will confront evil. He will return to confront evil and bring his kingdom and bring his true shalom. And we are called to be a people of hope and to bring that hope and that love to others. We are called to be bringers of shalom and of peace as well as we can until the true bringer comes. And that is all the notes that I have. It does say with power is, again, bringing about that full restoration and that complete shalom. And the great glory is evidenced in that he will be accompanied by angels, and there will be wonders that accompany him. But again, Jesus is in control. He's not surprised. Regardless, we trust him, trust that he has all of this in his hands and that evil's not going to get the final say. And we also need to trust that he is a good and just God. And so when we get scared that we're going to be one of the ones that are judged and we're mourning our judgment, we need to remember that he is a just and he is a good God and he is a loving God. He's not a hateful God. And that's something that religion teaches us, is that he's a hateful God. He's not. He's a loving God. He's a good God. And he will make the right call. He will make the just call. He will make the right call. Because he's a good God. And we have to trust that. We have to trust that everything's in his hands and that it is all going to work out, and we don't need to fear him. If we are truly his followers and we love him, we don't need to fear him and be afraid of him, because fear is not of love. True love casts out fear, and we need to remember that. And that is all that I have today. I'm losing my voice again, so that means it's time to stop, and I need to get back to work anyway. So thanks again, and I will see if Jate is streaming so we can... Yes, he is. I've never raided before. I'm going to try it. We'll see. I've never done it. So let's see if it works. And we're going to start the raid. Thanks, and I'll see y'all next time.